Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's Joel Bayer here, and I've been joined by the one and only, the Mr. Five Insider, David Ornstein, for the breaking news that Everton Football Club have been deducted 10 points, which leaves them languishing in the relegation zone. David, so many questions. What does this mean for Everton Football Club going forward and the other teams that got relegated last year? And of course, the question that people want to know, does this open a can of worms for Manchester City and their 114 pending charges? David, can you update us with the Everton news, please?
Joel, this is seismic news for the Premier League, for Everton. It's probably one of the biggest moments in Premier League history, and there could be so much more to come in terms of repercussions. So Everton had a case opened against them in March of this year. They were charged with breaches of the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, which used to be called financial fair play rules. It was just one breach relating to the 21 to 22 season. It didn't explain to us the full details of what this breach was, but in essence, across a 3-year period, clubs are allowed to lose under profit and sustainability rules £105 million. Everton's losses were £304 million across the period leading up to when they were charged. Now, there were mitigating circumstances, such as the COVID pandemic and losses that were allowable in that period for all clubs. Also, when the war broke out in Ukraine and there were sanctions against companies such as USM, who are owned by Alisher Usmanov, who is a business associate of the Everton owner Farhad Moshiri. And there were deals lined up, such as a lucrative first refusal on stadium naming rights for Everton's new ground at Bramley Moor Dock, such as the deal that already existed on Everton's Finch Farm training ground. They all vanished, leaving a financial hole. Everton also argued in the documentation that we've now seen, the written reasons, that they lost value on players. So in the end, between the Premier League Independent Commission, which has been hearing this case in recent weeks, and Everton, they have tried to adjust the figures, the losses that were allowed. And the Independent Commission, the Premier League, has come up with one figure. Everton have come up with another. They're about £19.5 million apart. Everton feel that they didn't breach. And if they did, it was only tiny. The Premier League felt it was quite significant, although some may say relatively small in the terms of the numbers that we talk about in football. And the recommendation from the Premier League to this independent panel was a 12-point deduction. What's happened is that the panel has ruled a 10-point deduction. That is to be applied immediately, which sees Everton drop into the relegation zone, second from bottom, only off the bottom by virtue of goal difference. And in a relegation battle, whether you think they might win it or not, let's see. They vigorously defend themselves and will continue to. They have the right to appeal against this, and they're going to. They are in absolute shock, and they're furious because they feel that they complied with the Premier League over a long period of time, that they were transparent. They agreed to an expedited process. They've sold players like Richarlison and Anthony Gordon to help them balance the books, and they felt that they had got themselves in good shape. Yet still, the body that they were working alongside and opening up their books to have adjudged them to have fallen foul of the rules. And in the Premier League statement, they've been quite firm in reiterating that Everton, in their view, did not have their house in order and deserved this punishment, and that Their owner, Farhad Mashiri, claimed that he needed to spend as much as possible to rejuvenate the team's midfield, when ultimately they just didn't comply. There is further detail in this relating to interest payments on the construction of their new stadium and the rules around that. Some of the interest payments and essentially not having to adhere to them at one point in the early years of this accounting period um, uh, was seen as okay, permissible. But then during the accounting period, the rules around the interest payments on the new stadium changed, and the Premier League says Everton didn't comply with this. So it gets quite technical, and I don't think for our audiences we should or need to go into that fine detail now. But the situation is, this is really monumental news, not just for Everton, but for the Premier League, for the history of the competition, because it's unprecedented to see a punishment of this scale, but also for the future. It could open up a massive can of worms.
Now, before we talk about the future, I want to look at a few other clubs that have been affected by this. I mean, obviously, when you're competing in the Premier League, there's 3 teams that go up, there's 3 teams that go down. Like, if you look at the season before, right? So you had Southampton go down, Leeds went down, Leicester went down, and Everton stayed up in 17th place by 2 points above Leicester City. What does that mean for those other clubs? Are they going to be taking any action? Are they going to feel hard done by? Can you let us know what's happening on that front, please?
These other clubs had already brought complaints to the Premier League. They had reportedly threatened legal action, saying that if Everton are found guilty, we are going to sue them. Another point to mention on this is that Everton feel that the Premier League are making an example of them in the face of an independent regulator that is coming into English football. It was in the King's Speech. It's going to be applied to legislation, because the powers that be in this country and many within football feel that football has shown it lacks the ability to regulate itself. We've seen clubs go out of business. We've seen clubs go into administration, liquidation, and encounter all manner of problems, Portsmouth, Bury, and so many more besides. And the government has said enough is enough. But the Premier League don't want an independent regulator. They feel that they can regulate themselves. They can make decisions on who owns clubs, and how to structure their finances. But case after case has indicated that perhaps they can't. And so, in an attempt to say to the government, we can, Everton feel that they are being more harshly treated. Portsmouth went into administration and were docked 9 points. Everton, for one breach of financial fair play, are being docked 10 points. And that's the sort of reasoning behind Everton's fury today as we record this. Because there's a much bigger picture here than just Everton. It's the wider environment of English football.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you there, but it makes a difference, because even now, if we're talking today, right, with the 10 points deducted, you've got Everton sitting with 4 points now. You've got Burnley with 4 points. You've got Sheffield United with 4 points. So Burnley being 20th, Everton 19th, Sheffield United 18th. And, you know, look, some may argue that they can still get out of this, because obviously there's, in my opinion, there's worse teams like Luton, etc. But, you know, it just makes you think, wow, like this is going to change the landscape of football in general. I want to move it on to Manchester City. 114 charges. Now, I don't know. You might know more than me. I don't know when their hearing's about to start, but surely with that number of cases, this sets the precedence that we could see a historic hearing with them. I mean, my God, like if Everton are losing 10 points with, is it one case, one charge? I'm not saying that they're similar. What are you doing with 114?
Before I come on to Man City, just one point to add is that the Premier League's, or the Independent Commission's, punishment of 10 points there was no formula in which you can get to that because there is no precedent for this. There were no guidelines as to how it comes about. And that's part of Everton's frustration on this. The appeals, some feel, will not be successful because if there was no clear guidelines as to how you ascertain the punishment in the first place, it's based on your view of the evidence, then what's your view when it comes to trying to maybe reduce that punishment, if it's all so subjective? That goes to show that we're in uncharted territory here. And that leads us on to Manchester City, because now everybody is asking, if Everton had one charge and Manchester City face 115, wow, Manchester City could drop down divisions. They could be stripped of titles. They talk about Chelsea too, because although they haven't been charged, there are investigations ongoing. The Premier League and the Football Association, at least looking into these allegations faced by the previous regime under Roman Abramovich, of potential breaches of financial fair play regulations, and quite excessive ones at that. Now, I think the first thing to point out is that these cases are not the same. So Manchester City's charges, Chelsea's allegations are both different from Everton's one charge. You could say that Everton's was quite straightforward in the sense that they're deemed to have breached the allowed limits for financial losses. They also were working with the Premier League. They almost held their hands up and admitted that there was a breach, but there's a discrepancy over how much that breach was. They agreed for the process to be expedited, and that brought it to a head quicker. There are some saying, well, they should have dug their heels in and delayed it and not been so cooperative, and then they would still be free to continue with the same number of points they're on now. Manchester City, some feel, are not complying in the same way, and there seems to be a lot more tension over, I don't know, the makeup of the independent commission, and when exactly this is going to come about. There is a lot of secrecy involved in these cases, a lack of transparency from everybody involved. We don't have it explained to us what's happening. Many of those Manchester City charges are repeats season after season. So it's not like they're necessarily 115 different charges by any means. There's a smaller number and they occurred each time.
All Makes of it even worse, doesn't it?
Sorry?
Makes it even worse, doesn't it?
Well, Manchester City contest and vigorously deny those charges themselves. So all I mean to say is there is no guarantee that the two cases are going to be treated in the same way. And if Chelsea have a case to answer, and others, because there are suggestions that there are more clubs who were sailing close to the wind, which is an expression being used at Everton. They knew they were sailing close to the wind. What situations might they find themselves in now the precedent of Everton has been set? But all I can say is, in the case of Manchester City and potentially Chelsea compared to Everton, it's like comparing apples and pears. They're just not the same, and so we can't prejudge it. I think it was very interesting in Everton's statement that they said we are going to be watching the cases against other clubs, and I think that's going to become a huge narrative now within English football. What's going on with the Manchester City and Chelsea cases? We want to hear more. There will inevitably be growing pressure on the Premier League, on the authorities, to deal with these cases for the integrity of the competition, for the future, for fairness, and treating everybody on a level playing field, and avoiding suggestions that you've perhaps just targeted Everton because they're a slightly smaller club. And I don't know, perhaps the bigger clubs have more powerful lawyers and they will defend themselves more vigorously, and all sorts of other conspiracy theories around this situation, their importance, their ownership, and other matters besides. But we don't know anything, is the truth for now, on the Manchester City case. I guess 2024 could be a defining year, given that 2023 February was when the charges came about, and we presume that panels are being assembled and the case is being moved forward. We just don't know exactly when it will come to a head. And furthermore, in all of this, the Premier League are changing these profit and sustainability rules in 2025 to fall more in line with UEFA's, which has slightly more allowable losses in some areas, tighter in others, a different way of calculating it. So Everton will be turning around today and saying, you've made an example of us based on rules that are going to change in a couple of years. And that's the basis of why they're going to defend themselves so strongly. But the punishment is here for now. Whether they manage to reduce it or not, let's see. Whether they manage to stay in the Premier League or not, let's see. Because there are many who feel that this punishment has come at the best possible time for Everton, if it was going to happen at all, because there are teams perceived to be weaker than them. And even with that 10-point punishment, perhaps the way they're playing, they'll get themselves to safety. You look at clubs like Arsenal, for example, who had as a large minority shareholder Alisher Usmanov at some point, who with Farhad Moshiri moved over to Everton. And a lot of the problems that Everton are facing are as a result of the loss of money that was on behalf of Alisher Usmanov, that sponsorship. You could say that might have been Arsenal if things had worked out differently and KSE, the Kroenke family, hadn't taken full control. There were so many questions about why aren't you spending more money for so many years? And clubs like Arsenal, now Manchester United, even Newcastle under their Saudi ownership are saying we can't because of financial fair play rules, because of profit and sustainability. We don't want to break them because of the potential consequences. And perhaps now we are seeing why they were so firm on that. And maybe their supporters will give back a little bit of credit or reduce their frustration that they expressed at a lack of spending. Because if you're not careful, it could be you in this position. And ultimately, whatever the politics and agenda around this, and there will be so much conversation and conspiracy theory, the Premier League are clearly trying to get tough to show that they can govern properly and create a league that has the trust of the people, the public, the fans, spectators all over the world for its integrity, its fairness, its balance, its sustainability. But in getting to where they want to go, it's going to be one hell of a fight on multiple levels.
David, I want to say thank you very much for giving us this updated news on the PSRs. If you guys don't know, it's been about profitability and sustainability rules. I'm telling you, it's going to be hitting the news for weeks, months, and I'm really, really keen to see what happens to the other clubs we spoke about, and also Manchester City. I know the United fans are really keeping an eye on that one as well. But David, thank you very much for joining us on the 5 Insider. And guys, please make sure you follow David across socials. Check out his stuff on the Athletics. The Athletic, everything is in the description below. Make sure you stay tuned and check out our interview that we just done recently with Mikel John Obi. It's a cracker. Joel Bayer, David Ornstein, signing out. Peace.